right, we'll go ahead and kick things off now. We're a couple of minutes past the hour, just about to be anyway. Thank you all for joining today. Today we're going to be talking through test automation and how it is your key for Ironclad Salesforce data security. So that'll be the topic of discussion for today's webinar. As always with these webinars, we like to do the Q&A at the end, but you can feel free to leave any questions you might have in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom panel. So go ahead and drop those questions in at any time, and we'll get to them at the end with the Q&A section. We'll try to get to as many as we possibly can there. I'll start things off with a bit of an introduction to myself. So I started my career as a full stack developer, working as a C# and .NET engineer. And then I got more into Selenium development, did a lot of automation, various different applications, both in-house and cloud-based. Then I kind of moved into more of the DevOps ecosystem, working in Azure DevOps and different Microsoft tools in the cloud. And that kind of shifted into being more of a DevOps consultant type role. So that's where I found my role initially at Provar. I've been with Provar now for about 5 years, and ultimately that's kind of been my journey as being more the DevOps and test automation, kind of marrying those two together. A bit about myself: I do like travel, I do like food. So this picture that you see here of my beautiful family is us at the Washington Monument, where we were traveling, and then I'm sure that we ate food at some point shortly after that. I also like nerd stuff. You'll see in the background here I have my Darth Vader mask, and I also have an Elder Wand behind me as well, which you can't see, but we can talk more about that later. But you're not here to hear about me, you're here to hear about data security. So for today's agenda, we'll start by kind of giving you an overview of what the current landscape is in terms of data security, and also how it pertains to the Salesforce world. We'll be focusing on some pretty heavily mandated industries in our discussion today, beginning with the government and public sector, then looking at FinServ and insurance, and then we'll get into healthcare and life sciences, followed by a case study that we have from one of our healthcare customers with Provar, and kind of some of their success and key metrics there that we'll go over. And then, of course, as promised, we'll get into a Q&A near the end. So first and foremost, cybersecurity definition really is just confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data, and how it's migrated and kind of ultimately how it connects to all of your different applications. So that's really all it is, right? But in the past several years, we've really been in more of a transition. So we look at the state of Salesforce security today. We've really been in more shifting towards cloud-based hosting of all of our data, from less and less on-prem storage. More is being hosted into the cloud. We're obviously utilizing Salesforce, a majority of our customer-related data, and then we also have our own databases that are being migrated into the cloud as well. But in the context of Salesforce, we're concerned more here with access controls, all the different ways that you can handle permission settings when it comes to data security. But it's really expanded due to the escalation of cyber threats in the industry. So you'll see a lot more proactive monitoring, more robust encryption metrics, and more comprehensive protection across all the applications. And this really is now the gold standard for data security in the Salesforce ecosystem. There's been a number of several advancements in the Salesforce data security realm as well. Namely, you have things like AI-driven threat detection. You can utilize the blockchain, which allows for immutable data storage. And then there's more enhanced encryption algorithms that are pretty much immune to these brute force type of attacks. That doesn't mean that we don't share responsibility, however, in ensuring the applications that are all under test, which really leads me into my next point, and that is, where does testing come into the picture here? So with manual testing, there's always going to be human error. There's a factor here in terms of human error, and automated testing is really the only consistent way, especially when you get into more medium to large businesses with those more complex business scenarios that span multiple applications, right? So automated testing is really critical for identifying vulnerabilities earlier on in the development lifecycle, as well as these potential gaps that we might have in our Salesforce infrastructure, which includes all the updates and all the applications that the data exchange is happening between. So the key here is really continuously assessing all of our threats and all of our applications and how we're managing them and how we're managing our security standards without spending too much time or resources on these. So it gets a bit tricky. So when we talk about heavily mandated industries, of course, they're a fast-moving target. But you may be asking, what if I'm not in one of these heavily mandated industries, right? Such as, the public sector, financial services, healthcare, insurance. Obviously, security is important for everyone, not just Salesforce users and not just those of us that are in heavily mandated industries. It's really across the board. It can be pivotal for any organization to, make sure that you're safeguarding your customers' trusts, ensuring compliance standards regularly, and protecting your company's reputation ultimately. And really, this is everyone's responsibility, right? So whether you're an admin, a sales rep, a marketer, a CS rep, a developer, architect, cybersecurity ultimately is everyone's responsibility. Because at the end of the day, this is what we want, right? We want to be able to build cool new features and we want to have a secure Salesforce org, right? This makes sense. This is kind of the balancing act, though, that we're dealing with today. And that we want our applications, we want everything to be performant, we want it to be reliable, we want users to love our products. But at the end of the day, we also want everything to be secure. So security is really the utmost importance. And the bulk of the conversation today will be really around how we can balance these two things. So we'll shift gears a little bit and we'll talk more about industry specifics. We'll start with the government and public sector. So the government and public sector, give a brief overview here of some of the common issues and the things that they're facing, right? So they're dealing with a lot of data, a lot of customer data, a lot of citizen information, a lot of financial records. So security is obviously the utmost importance. One of the biggest challenges that they do face, however, is how to safeguard this information against unauthorized attacks and access, but also how to ensure, proper productivity within their departments. So they're dealing with a lot of different regulatory requirements. There's GDPR, FedRAMP, FISMA, HIPAA. Non-compliance is not only a security risk, but it also can affect public trust and confidence in the applications as well. So the public sector obviously has to manage a number of different diverse departments, right? There's a lot of different teams that are all working with different roles, different access levels, and different responsibilities. So as stated, the balancing act here is really to maintain the data security and compliance of all of our applications that are under test, but also to ensure that we're being productive, that we're not preventing users and we're giving them the minimum access required to do their jobs effectively. We don't want it to be too much red tape to get in the way. So let's talk about how automation or how testing at more of a scalable level can really help the public sector and government industries. So when we talk about it, obviously there's all these different data regulations. The problem with these is not just that they're difficult to kind of keep up with, but that they're always changing, right? So you're having to kind of chase them down in this case and making sure that you're constantly assessing your regulatory compliance. You're also dealing with, all these different personas that you're testing, all the different permission levels, all the different access levels of all the users in the applications. And you want to make sure that you're not granting them unauthorized access to certain parts of the application, certain users, certain records, and things like that. There's also the challenge of how to identify vulnerabilities and ensure accuracy of all the integrations that you're dealing with Salesforce and beyond, and how to remedy these security weaknesses ultimately. So you want to make sure that you're kind of going through this cycle, right? And it is a bit of a whack-a-mole situation where you're identifying the vulnerabilities, you're fixing it, and you're trying to build for the future, but then something else happens and you're kind of going through this process, right? So you can see how doing all that manually would be very time-consuming and also prone to error. Another point here, the last problem that they're really dealing with is how do we maintain the integrity of our data across all of our different applications and integrations that we might have. So when we look on the right-hand side here, we're looking at test automation and how it can solve some of these issues, right? So really the focus here is automation can help you keep up with this shifting landscape of all the government regulations. So there's no need to manually test new configurations and do regression testing of all of your older configuration as well. So whenever you have automation in place, it really helps to scale up this process and help you stay ahead of the game here. We talk about scaling again when we talk about how to test all these different personas. It's a very common problem that people are dealing with is how do they test all of these different personas? How do they test all these different data combinations and permutations of roles and permission sets? Doing it through automation gives you a faster time to fail, which means that you have a quicker process, right? And this is really about helping us to shift testing left and testing our integrations in more of an end-to-end manner way early in the software development lifecycle, which helps us to increase our coverage, catch bugs early on, and things like that. Automation can also help identify vulnerabilities through things like data-driven testing, which is really, again, just accommodating all the different permutations of data that may be happening. So like if you have a form and you have a multi-select pick list, you want to be able to test all the different combinations of that pick list in a form and ensure that everything is working properly, that every user has the right access, can edit and create and update and delete all the necessary fields and records that they need to. And data integrity, of course, being able to properly verify and validate all the data through automation in a repeatable, reliable way is difficult to do manually. So seamless regression testing through automation allows us to keep up to date with all the Salesforce updates and releases that are coming. So when we focus on kind of the criteria or how to evaluate automation from a government and public sector perspective, really there's a few key components here. The first one is modern level encryption techniques and making sure that we have a secure testing environment, which really means that we have access to our data that we're testing. We have access to the test environment that's being used, so we can properly regulate it, right? So we can properly make sure that that environment is up to par as far as our standards go. We also want something that allows us to have more precise user access controls. So that way we can configure which users have access to which records, what they're able to do in our application, and things like that. Another key metric here is to make sure that there's some kind of vulnerability assessment that's happening on a continual basis, and there's threat detection capabilities built into the solution, which allows us to provide automated testing scenarios for these types of threats. We talked about regulations a number of times. This won't be the last, but being able to validate these regulatory compliance standards on a continual basis is something that's very difficult to do through manual means. So having an automation solution that is able to do this and some kind of validation around that is very helpful. And we talked about Salesforce updates. Keeping up with Salesforce release changes and security updates is a big thing. We want something that's the latest version of both Salesforce, but also making sure that it's in line and in alignment with the Salesforce roadmap as it pertains to security updates. So such as the multi-factor authentication, all those different types of things that Salesforce is kind of putting in place as the default. We want to make sure that our solution is in lockstep with those changes as well. And the last point here, and really one of the most important ones that you'll hear me talk about a few times throughout this webinar, is ensuring that we're able to do thorough testing across the entire gambit of our applications and data exchange. So this includes databases, APIs, the Salesforce platform, and full web coverage, right? All as part of the same flow. So we're really mimicking an end-to-end scenario in this case. And that's a really good way to ensure that security is being properly upheld across all of our applications whenever a user is actually going through the process. So let's shift into financial services now and talk a little bit about kind of what are they seeing from an overview, from a data security overview. So the financial sector, of course, it also, similar to government and public sector, deals with a lot of customer information. There's financial transactions. There's a lot of proprietary business data that they're having to validate. All this valuable data ultimately sets them up on a pedestal for where people are more likely to want to get into these systems and get unauthorized access and things like that. So they're really prime targets for these types of cyber threats. Additionally, they have to adhere to a number of different stringent, very strict regulatory frameworks. Same thing with the government. We're dealing with GDPR, we're dealing with HIPAA, SOC 2, and different compliance metrics, right? And there's an ever-changing industry-specific standards that are in play here, especially for banks and insurance companies. So it's all about how we can navigate this complex web of compliance requirements, not only to ensure that we're avoiding all the fines and penalties and legal repercussions that we're dealing with here, but also to make sure that we're dealing with the risks as they come. As with any legacy infrastructure, there's a lot of complex and diverse interactions between Salesforce and old school databases that we're trying to migrate over to newer platforms. But in the meantime, you have to support them, right? So you're dealing with a lot of third-party applications here. There's a lot of complex vulnerabilities that can happen when you're dealing with migrating that data. So you need to be vigilant about monitoring and comprehensively testing across all these multiple systems to ensure proper security. Coupled with that, we have to be able to continuously adapt to keep up with the cyber attacks. It's not something that is they try one method and then they move on if it fails. These attacks are becoming more and more sophisticated, especially with the revolution of AI and a lot of different ways to automate brute force attacks and things like that. So financial institutions have to continuously stay up to date with new mandates and regulations, but they need to make sure that they're doing this in a multifaceted way, where they're also providing good security, but they're also promising good productivity for their internal teams and high customer satisfaction, which is a really big thing in this industry as well. So again, we'll look at some of the problems that they're facing as it comes to scalability and testing and how automation can kind of help with this particular industry. First and foremost, as stated, there's a lot of different Salesforce configurations and customizations that they're dealing with, a lot of different user profiles. This can, of course, be challenging at scale when you're performing it manually. Just as with the public sector, there's a lot of different regulations. There's a lot of industry standards that we need to stay on top of here. So again, manual effort here is multiplied to the nth degree. And also, we have a lot of complex integrations. So we're dealing with financial systems such as Financial Services Cloud. We're dealing with MuleSoft a lot of the time. nCino is often involved. And these are all outside of Salesforce. But a lot of time, there's data exchange between these systems and Salesforce, where Salesforce is kind of the central component. And then you have all the different things it's connecting to and interfacing with, right? All of these can ultimately negatively impact user experience, performance, and the seamlessness of your internal workflows. So being able to stay on top of these and make sure that they're properly tested for all these things is a key component and key success metric for this industry. There's also this drive to innovate and be more competitive, right? It can seem counterintuitive, however, with maintaining system stability and uptime. And this is really just kind of a note on what DevOps truly is as it pertains to security, right? You have the operational side, wants everything to stay the same. They want everything to be 100%, nothing changed. Let's just keep everything running and make sure it runs well. And then you have the development side that wants to constantly update things and make sure that, they're staying on top of user satisfaction and they're boosting their metrics and making sure that they're building out new features and fixing bugs and things like that. So they seem to be in conflict, especially when stability of the actual system and security are in play here. So you need to be able to do this in more of a cohesive and collaborative way. So we'll talk more about that on the automation side. The first point here, as we discussed previously, automation can really help by simulating all these different user profiles. It can help you to mimic certain threats that may occur during your applications and how they're used. It can also help you to validate user permissions in more end-to-end style scenarios. It helps to also obviously have something that is Salesforce centric, because we talked about Salesforce kind of being the central component of all of these different interfaces and applications that we're dealing with. So you need to be able to make sure that you're maintaining your regulatory requirements by validating the handling of data and workflows in between Salesforce and all these different third-party applications. And you'll hear me say end-to-end testing a couple of times today, but end-to-end and integration testing in order to validate both the front end and the back end processes as part of the same flow is actually a critical component here, and that automation can help with. Something that is very challenging to do manually because you're dealing with having to imitate API calls, setting up mock APIs to get data back from the system and putting that data manually into Salesforce or otherwise, and then kind of validating it from there. But there's a lot of back and forth there, a lot of manual error that can happen. As going with the DevOps best practices, right? Continuous testing becomes more of a requirement. So we need to be able to have a way to shift testing left to simplify the validation and all the transformation of our data as it's coming over from these older legacy systems, but also to jumpstart all of our software development lifecycle to make sure that we're eliminating all the manual processes that are involved. So this is really shift testing left, as we talked about. which really just means we're bringing testing earlier into the picture, right? We're testing things earlier on to catch these bugs to make sure that we're staying on top of it. So here's a couple of things that you may want to evaluate if you're looking at an automation solution in the financial services industry. Obviously, you want a solution that provides proper ways to test all of the different roles and user profiles across all the different applications. So RBAC, or role-based access control, is kind of the standard for highly secure industries. So naturally, you'd want a way to be able to test all the different accesses for all the different roles that you have in your industry. So this makes sense that you want something that allows you to do this. As stated, there's a lot of complex and intricate integrations in the FinServ industry. You're dealing with legacy systems, MuleSoft integrations, connections between Salesforce and Encino, and the list goes on. So ideally, your automation solution should be able to test these without a reliance on external tooling. What we mean by that is doing everything with one solution, one tool, versus having a lot of different tools that allow you to do the same kind of function, right? So you want to be able to directly access all the data and all of the environments that you're operating with in terms of testing. In other words, it should stay behind your network firewall. Anything that you're testing as far as the data needs to be owned by you, and it needs to be validated by you as well. So you should be able to have direct access to it for compliance purposes. So this is a key thing that you'll want to evaluate. Now, we're talking about financial services. We've talked about a lot of different integrations. So there's a lot of different types of testing that you may see in this industry. This is not a comprehensive list, but these are just some of the more common ones that do come up. So integration testing, as discussed, which involves database and API validations, as well as more back-end processing and things like that. A subset of that would be batch testing, where you're triggering Apex jobs and other types of jobs and verifying that they're running successfully and all the data is being created as it should. Then you have performance testing, which is a bit of a tricky one, but service level agreements do come into play quite often in the financial services industry, especially from the service side. So you need to be able to add those into your testing scenarios wherever possible. Then you have security testing, which is really about how we can automate penetration testing and mimicking these types of threats that you may see. It's also verifying permissions for all the different user profiles and personas that you have in your Salesforce orgs and applications. And regression testing kind of sums up a lot of these, but it's really the most important because it's a never-changing ecosystem, Salesforce is, and then you also have all of your applications that you're updating. So you need to be able to resiliently and reliably test all of your code and config upon each release. And doing that time and time again, the time really adds up when you're talking about manually doing this. So this is something you'll want to evaluate firsthand as an automation solution. A bit of a newer concept, but in-sprint automation allows companies to really shift left more and incorporate DevOps best practices into their QA and development teams. So this is really where you want your QA team to test features and bug fixes in parallel with the development team in their sprints. So it's more it does require more of an intuitive solution to use because you need something that is easy to use. You know, need to be able to create these test cases very rapidly, and you need to make sure that you're not behind here because sprints can run. I've seen 1 week sprints, 2 week sprints. Some folks have even longer ones. But if you're working in a 2 week sprint cycle and you want to be able to test a feature in that same cycle, you need to be able to create a test case for it in a short amount of time and validate it. So you need something that is intuitive if you're going to look at this type of testing. Okay, so all in all, you need to be able to tackle all these different things when you're looking at financial services if you're looking at an automation solution. We'll switch out to healthcare and life sciences and talk through some of the overview for security in this industry now. This is a bit of a different one, but as with all the other ones, it is a heavily mandated industry. However, there's a little bit more of a high stakes involved here in the healthcare and life sciences. It is there's a lot of private information, a lot of PII. You're obviously complying with numerous regulatory requirements. There's personal health records and the safeguarding of those. There's HIPAA, of course, we're all familiar with. You also have different regulations that are mandated by the FDA here in the US that change very regularly, very often. So you want to be able to keep up with those. Again, you're dealing with user access across a number of different applications for a number of different individuals within the healthcare industry. So all of your different healthcare workers involved here, you can imagine all the different access levels that they may have. And this is one industry where you're often dealing in very time sensitive scenarios. So workflows have to perform optimally in order to have continued success in this industry, and also to have a good, output from this as well. So there is a reliance here in terms of data security on the accuracy of the data, and also the sensibility of the data. So information needs to be validated throughout the entire customer journey from beginning to end to ensure that everything is as accurate as possible. That is the utmost importance here. So what are some of the issues that they face as it pertains to security and testing? Now, as discussed, you're dealing with diverse user groups. You have, clinicians, administrative staff, you have third-party entities, there's insurances that have different access level. You want to be able to provide them the proper access without compromising on, data security, and also without violating HIPAA and different things like that. Additionally, healthcare applications do require frequent updates and bug fixes to improve patient care, but also productivity. And it's built, if you think about all the applications that are built on the Salesforce platform, like Healthcare Cloud, that has a lot of different updates separate from Salesforce itself. So you have to ensure that these updates don't compromise any patient data and don't disrupt any of your established working scenarios and security protocols that you have in place. Additionally, as with all industries, you have a number of different integrations here, but these integrations involve the exchange of data across different systems, which introduce potential vulnerabilities. So you're tasked with securing all these integration points to prevent data breaches and unauthorized access to patient records and other information. So again, the key here is, how do we do this from an automation perspective, and how can we solve each of these problems? So automation can obviously help with validating all the different access levels that you have and user controls by automating, all these processes and simulating all these different users to ensure that you're reducing your risk of unauthorized data exposure in your different systems. It can also help to implement something that is seamless. And when we say seamless, we mean, it's centered around Salesforce. So Salesforce updates don't force us to go and update all of our test cases, right? This automation solution should validate all the updates and modifications, ensuring that critical security features remain intact during all the system enhancements, and we're also safeguarding our patient data integrity. Additionally, the testing of all of our data and the entire flow of our data by testing all the different integration points, by simulating various end-to-end scenarios, and by validating the endpoint security, which can help us to mitigate these vulnerabilities earlier on and secure our data flow within our healthcare system. And it's really about doing this at the early stages, right? So not waiting till staging or even pre-production or production to start worrying about whether or not the data is accurate, but doing it in a sandbox where you have some mock data, where you have data that has been, scrubbed of any PI and things like that, right? Okay, so how do we evaluate, again, in the healthcare and life sciences industry, an automation solution? So we're looking at this perspective. Again, we're looking at encryption of data and the management of our data. This is at the forefront. So this means that you should have control of your data. You should be able to encrypt it when it is in transit and when it is obviously being hosted somewhere. Integration security testing is something I haven't mentioned by name, but I've kind of alluded to it. Really, it's about validating data and the sanitization of data, the authentication and authorization checks that happen whenever you're logging into different applications. There's proper error handling whenever the wrong or the unauthorized access is triggered. There's logging involved there too. And there's secure communication networks within your firewall, so that everything that talks to and from Salesforce is going through that channel. This kind of testing really helps to prevent issues such as SQL injection or SOQL injection in the case of Salesforce, cross-site scripting, and other types of injection attacks. So if you're in the business of Salesforce and or healthcare cloud, then any automation solution that is aware of and in alignment with these two products and applications therein, it can really help to ensure compliance is being maintained, obviously, because that way they know that Salesforce is coming out with a release. They know how to keep up with the MFA requirements, the FDA regulations, and all of those things. So you don't have to worry as much about updating your test cases to compensate for that. Another point here is persona-based testing, which we kind of talked about in the financial services industry as well with RBAC. But this is really about having a simple and scalable way to handle user-based testing whenever we're evaluating an automation solution. And since we're talking about efficiency, right, we want our users, our internal users and our external users to be very productive, and we want the performance to be top-notch. This is extremely vital, right? So the usage and onboarding of any automation solution shouldn't be excluded from that. The tool needs to be intuitive. It needs to support the customer-facing scenarios out of the box, ideally. And you need to be able to get up to speed with it very quickly so you can continue on and validate these scenarios very quickly in your sprints and all of your different automation. Okay, so we've discussed all the different industries. We talked about government, public sector. We talked about the financial services industry. We talked about healthcare and life sciences and kind of how data security is handled there and some different tools and different criteria you can look to evaluate as far as automation goes with those. But I'd like to shift a little bit to talk more specifically on a case study that we had with one of our clients, PatientPoint, who is a healthcare organization. So for those of you that aren't familiar, PatientPoint is a leading healthcare technology platform. They specialize in patient engagement at every point of care. So it's really their mission to provide integrated patient engagement solutions around all the key points of care that are involved to help all the different healthcare professionals improve their outcomes, their efficiency, and overall their patient satisfaction. They were founded in 2009. And there were some issues whenever they came to us that they were facing that are fairly common in the industry. So you'll see these and you'll say that this is maybe a problem with your organization as well. They were dealing with very slow releases. So the release time was slow. Testing was a barrier, and it was taking about 3 days to execute all of their testing each time they had a release. So this was obviously slowing down their process to be able to roll out updates and push out bug fixes and things like that. As a result of this, a lot of times they did have compromised output quality, where the quality was sometimes being compromised due to releases either not being on time, or they had to cut back on different updates to ensure that they were releasing on time. So this is something that does come up where we have to cut different scenarios from our testing because we just don't have time to test them, or we've already tested so much that we don't really have time to validate them properly, right? So we have to end up cutting back on features, or maybe say that it's good enough, right? We were shooting for 80% pass rate, but we only got 70, but release is tomorrow, so we got to go ahead. This does happen from time to time, unfortunately. There also was this need to test all the different applications and integrations across their org. So it was extremely tedious for their teams and involved a lot of manual effort. It was very prone to error, right? I've mentioned all these things before. And it's very difficult to just really get it right. There's a lot of things that you can't necessarily do from a manual testing side of things. And it was just causing a lot of issues for them internally. So what was their goals behind this, and what did the solution look like? So they were primarily dealing with Salesforce, Sales and Service Cloud, along with their different applications that they were managing, but these were their platform-specific apps that they were testing. So their goals were pretty clear from the get-go. They wanted to streamline testing, and they wanted a better process in terms of QA. Really, what they mean by streamlining testing is they wanted to have the same testing experience for all of their releases and for all of their applications, rather than having different testing teams or different testing processes for different features or different parts of the application. They wanted it to be standard across the board so they could all have the same kind of metrics for success, the same requirements and things like that. They also wanted to be able to increase their test coverage, right? Makes sense. They have a lot of manual testing that was falling short. They were leaving a lot of gaps. And as we know, as we discussed, any kind of gaps in testing can be vulnerabilities if left unchecked. So when security is at the forefront here, we don't want any of these gaps in our testing processes. So they wanted to be able to increase their overall test coverage. Additionally, they wanted to be more productive. They wanted to have their release times go down. They wanted to have their testing time go down. So kind of what were the results of this? So when we look at some of the key metrics here, whenever they began implementing Provar Automation. So at the beginning, they noticed that they were starting at 2 to 3 days for their testing processes. In terms of hours, you can see it's about 72 hours there, and they were cutting that down to about 3 hours depending on their test suites that they were executing. So testing went from being a bottleneck in the release process to being more of a release accelerator for them. They were also able to, whenever they onboarded Provar Automation, they were able to find and resolve all the bugs earlier on. So they reduced the rework process that they were having to do. And this led to quicker resolutions because they were catching them in their sandbox environments and they weren't having to find the bugs in production and then roll everything back. The kind of the key to this was that they were able to set up a rapid and reliable workflow for testing these integrations through our integration with Jenkins. So they are able to set up a continuous integration and delivery and deployment model with Jenkins. So they are able to run Provar. The jobs were triggered. They were running twice a week automatically. They were scheduled to run in their staging sandbox, which covered a lot of their different regression. So the team was able to focus more on functional testing in a different sandbox. So they were actually testing in parallel. They still had a lot of manual effort as far as the functional testing, but they were able to run a lot of the regression in a different sandbox. So the QA team was actually freed up to do more kind of exploratory type testing. So you can actually see how this enabled them to increase their coverage quite extensively here. So it also enabled them to, of course, capture and report these errors that they were finding earlier on. So when we talk about some of the feedback from the team that we received, these are a couple of quotes that we got from our friends over at PatientPoint. The one that probably stands out the most to me here is the last quote, coming from a DevOps and test automation background, having been an engineer on the development side and also a QA. I find this a little humorous, but also this is kind of the goal of DevOps, right? We want developers to like or love even their QAs again. We don't want QAs and developers to be enemies. We want them to be friends, right? So the end of this quote, the developers were loving me, they were loving the tool, and it benefited not only the QA team, but the whole team in general. So you can see here, as you increase your testing coverage, as you increase the efficiency of your testing processes, and also how you provide an automated way to do that, so you have shorter time to actually test, it makes the developers more empowered to be able to push out more features per sprint, because you're not, held back by, oh, we have to leave at least 3 days for testing all of this. Well, now it only takes 3 hours. So we can throw in a lot more in there. We can fix more bugs. We can do more development, and we can make our applications better and faster. So this was a key kind of success metric for the team that we saw. So to summarize here, we'll talk through kind of this summary from the Provar perspective. We talked about all the different industries. We talked about healthcare. We talked about insurances, financial services, government, public sector, all the different data security problems that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, how automation can help with those issues. And also we looked at our case study there from PatientPoint. So when we're looking at this from the Provar perspective, there were a couple similarities that you may have noticed when all the criteria and all the different things that we're evaluating. So first of all, data security and management of our data. So Provar allows us to encrypt our data, obviously allows for management of your data. It's never shared with anyone. All the data that you're using in a Provar test case are encrypted client side, and it's all hosted by you. So we don't get access to it anyway. So there's no threat there, right? So this is a key component when you're looking at it from a security perspective. Obviously, autonomy is important when you're dealing with testing, as we discussed. So with Provar, you choose where you're running your tests, and you have full autonomy of the testing environment, meaning that all the projects, all the test cases, all the data that you have is all operating within your network. We don't have access to it, and we can't have access to any of the historical executions or anything like that, or the data that you're using. Another key thing here that we talked about multiple times is how to imitate and test various users and personas. It's actually incredibly easy with Provar. We have a specific feature that was built to do this called extract and assert layouts. So it's very performant, it's very powerful. essentially allows you to extract an entire layout for a particular user profile for a particular object within Salesforce, and you can validate that at another time. So if you had any kind of changes to it, you can actually perform that through an automated way, and you can build that into your testing process. A key here with Provar and a differentiator for us is our metadata-driven approach. And it's really the most reliable way to test Salesforce and future-proof your tests so that you can actually keep up with regression testing, all of the major releases that Salesforce has, and compliance requirements that you're doing on a regular basis. Metadata-driven, what we mean by that is the tests are more robust because we're not relying on the page structure or the layout or the profile or the org or anything like that to build out the test case. It's all based on the metadata of that particular flow. So that allows us to build out tests in a more robust manner. And it's much more intuitive because you don't have to have any coding experience to be able to know which locators to use, how the application was built, or anything like that. Again, here as a longtime Salesforce partner, our primary goal in terms of automation is to align ourselves to the Salesforce roadmap. This is something that our users don't have to worry about. So every time they build a test, Salesforce has a release, we're already updated ahead of time to make sure that we have accounted for it. We've already tested it, so you don't have to test it as well. One thing that I will discuss here as well is that a lot of people come from us from manual testing backgrounds. They talk about how they want to increase their test coverage, similar to PatientPoint, as we discussed, but they can't seem to catch up and increase their coverage. So your entire application, right, you're dealing with all these security risks and things like that. How do you keep up with all that? By offering a comprehensive suite of capabilities, really what we mean by that is the ability to test all the key integrations that you have, make it not easy to account for your Salesforce specific scenarios, but also your third-party applications, your APIs, databases, and email validations, all in the same testing process. So Provar offers all these integration capabilities to be able to fully support end-to-end testing. And ultimately, as a part of this, Salesforce is really historically the hardest thing to test. And that's the thing that we test best, but we also have the ability to test everything else as well. So I'll leave a quick note here before we kind of close things off and head into the Q&A. We do have a direct link here where you can book time. So if you'd like to learn more about Provar or how we can help you with your data security and test automation and scaling out your testing, here's a link where you can book time with us. And we'll also be posting that directly in the chat so you can access that there. So I'll leave that up for just one moment. Okay. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to this webinar today. I know we're all very busy, but I definitely appreciate everyone's time today. Appreciate you all joining in. And now we'll move over to some questions. So if you have any questions and you haven't asked them already, please open the Q&A inside of Zoom there and go ahead and ask away. We have a question that came in here. There seems to be a lot of steps and management involved in test automation. Yeah, so this is something that's definitely something that we're aware of, right? People look at test automation, it can be kind of scary sometimes, and sometimes it can seem like a monumental effort and how to manage it and a lot of steps to get it set up. Having an intuitive solution definitely helps with that. Having something that's connected to Salesforce definitely helps with that as well. Folks that are already used to using Salesforce are pretty familiar with how to use Provar because Test Builder works in the Salesforce UI. And we also have a Provar Manager application, which is a Salesforce native package that's on the App Exchange that allows you to set up your testing and kind of get started there. And there's free trials available on the App Exchange as well. So we had a question come in. How do we do security testing using Provar? Great question. Depends on what you mean by security testing, but oftentimes, as discussed, this involves doing different types of penetration testing, or as stated, imitating different users and validating the correct access and things like that. So we can do the extraction and assertion of entire page layouts in Salesforce. So that's one way that we can do security testing. We can imitate all the different user personas, and we can ensure that they have the appropriate access. You can also simulate or imitate different threats through automation if you know what those threats look like. So that's one way that we support that. We had a question come here. Is the product installed locally in our own server, or is the product web-based? This is a great question, one that we often get. So Provar is a hybrid application, I would say. We have a desktop application that runs client-side, and then we also have a Salesforce app that runs whenever you install that in your Salesforce org. So the two work in tandem. They're not reliant. You can use one or the other, but they do work great in parallel, and that's usually what we see to be the most successful. All right, so for key metrics, there's a question here. For key metrics, would you recommend some standard ones to start with, or some questions we should consider to develop our own internal key metrics or KPIs to validate testing automation, whether or not it helped? This is a great question. It's a bit of a loaded question because you always need a starting point when you're looking at KPIs, because you want to see how you've improved, right? I think from the testing perspective, not security being involved here, but just from the testing perspective, coverage is something that we often look at. So how much coverage do you have? In other words, how much of your application is being tested? That's something that you can easily track over time if you kind of just do some digging on your sprints and your features, and you see which ones have links to test cases or which ones have been actually tested in Sandbox or otherwise. That's something that you can definitely start looking at. You don't want to go just based on the quantity of test cases, because that doesn't necessarily tell you what's really happening. So there's different coverage metrics that you can use. There's, of course, just the scenario coverage. Are you covering all your user stories and scenarios with testing? There's risk-based coverage, where you analyze all of your user stories and work items based on the impact that they have and the severity. So how severe is this user story if it were to fail, like logging in, for example. So these are things that you can analyze for risk coverage that are very helpful to kind of go and look at over time. There's different KPIs, of course. You can obviously research these, but yeah, I would say coverage is a big one. Looking at the different types of coverage, the number of test cases that you're validating, how many user personas you're imitating, how much of your application is being covered as far as the data flows and things like that. And obviously, the amount of time that you spend testing is a big one. So we talked about that in our case study, right? If you're spending 3 days on testing and then you find that later you're only spending 3 hours on it, that's a huge metric that's a good success metric to look at there. We had a question in here. How can I implement Gearset with Provar Automation? Great question. So we actually do have an integration with Gearset, not directly through automation, but through our Salesforce app, because we have an API that we've exposed for that Salesforce application that allows you to trigger your Provar test cases and jobs through Gearset. So you can run a deployment or a validation, what have you, through Gearset, and then you can trigger Provar test cases to run as part of that same thing. Trial here about a question about a free trial for practice. So we do offer a free trial of the Provar Manager application on the App Exchange. If you just search for Provar Manager, you can find the button there where you can get a free trial, or you can reach out to us and we will be happy to set you up with a trial of both Automation and Manager. And if you're just looking for some additional learning, we do have the University of Provar, which is completely free for everyone. Tons of great content on there, not just for Provar related topics, but also security, automation, QA, DevOps, and things like that. So I would suggest you all check that out as well if you haven't already. It's just provar.me, and you can register for free. We had a question about role-based access control in the automation process and what are its benefits. Some examples, if any. Okay, I can think of an example that we had recently. So if you have, let's say, 30 different personas that you need to test in Salesforce to make sure that they all have the correct create, read, update, delete access across all the fields for a numerous amount of objects, doing this type of testing is very difficult manually, because you're basically just doing manual verifications to make sure you log in as that user, you go to the record layout, and then you're just validating it, right? So having automation to do that for you can really expedite the process. So the benefits are time savings, And that was hopefully a good example for you to kind of look at that. We had a question here. Can we get metadata components in Provar Manager even through a non-API test? Interesting question there. May have to follow up on that one. We do have the capability to import metadata components for test cases through Provar Manager and the Provar Automation integration. So what that allows you to do is see how much of your metadata is covered by test cases, which is another useful coverage metric. So that should be available. May have to follow up there to see if you're facing any issues with that, but we'll love to have a chat if you are. I talked about the trial there. We had another question about that. We had a question about how to leverage Tableau and Einstein with Provar Manager. This may warrant another follow-up, as I am neither a Tableau nor an Einstein expert by any means. So I may have to follow up on that one there. We had a question on, is there an easier way to deal with test data for personas over and above using OAuth 2 connections? Interesting question there. Not quite sure the what you're asking, but I will say that in terms of test data for personas, within the context of Salesforce, they offer a lot of different ways to kind of lock that down. Usually through automation, what we do is we set up a connection to an admin profile, and then we set up a number of different connections to different users that we can log into through that admin. So we handle the actual connection process through the admin. So we can do that using a connected app. We can use OAuth, right? And there's different ways that we can manage that within our project. So that would be kind of the way that we do that. Can we integrate JMeter tests to Provar to measure the performance metric? Another great question there. I have never personally used JMeter. I come from a .NET and a C# background as far as my automation. So never used JMeter to measure performance before. So I'd have to look at that. What I will say is that Provar does generate a JUnit report from its test cases. So, and we also allow you to attach service level agreements and things like that and timings to all of your test steps and your test cases. So you can get an output and see what steps are taking the longest and if they're within that SLA range and everything. So that is built into the tool. As far as the JMeter integration, not 100% on that one, but a great question. I have to follow up there. Any other questions in the meantime? Great questions so far. Okay. Well, I would like to thank everyone for attending. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your engagement and all these questions. Hopefully we answered all the questions there. Did to the best of my ability anyway. Thank you all for coming and have a good rest of your day.